So for those of you who are paying attention, I am not Chris Ansell, CEO of XO Communications. Unfortunately, he came down sick a couple hours ago, so I was tapped with this presentation. So bear with me if it's a little bit rough, but we'll get through it together, and it should be a good presentation. We spent a lot of time within the industry talking about virtualization and NFV and SDN.
So who are you? Do you work for XO?
Very good question. So the question was, who am I and why am I up here? So my name is Matt Bateman. I do work for XO Communications. I am in the technology and architecture group. I am the technical team lead for our NFV, SDN, and cloud initiatives. So I'm going to come from a little more of a technical background rather than a sales and marketing. So you'll get a slightly different spin here, but basically the same message, and hopefully we'll be able to keep it interesting for you. So thank you for that. As I said, within the industry, we've been talking quite a bit about virtualization for a few years now, and it's starting to get real. But I wanted to turn it around a little bit today and focus it more on not what that means for us internally as communications providers, but what does that mean for our customers? So I want to take a quick poll, first of all. How many people out here are from a CSP? Show of hands? Not many, okay. How many are from enterprise? Not many, okay, so who's left? So anybody want to throw out, if you're not from one of those two, what are you from? Press? Vendors. I heard vendors. Okay, so that's an interesting take on this as well. So we'll talk a little bit about how vendors play into this also. But mostly I wanted to focus on what this means to enterprises and why they should care about some of this that's going on. So there's several promises to virtualization that really are going to apply to our customers. And it really boils down to three basic things. We want to give them control of their communications and their network infrastructure. We want to put that in the hands of the customer and let them have what they need, when they need it, how they need it. That's not something that we currently do very well today. We also want to give them control over the costs involved with that. So not only do we give them control of what they need, but how they choose to pay for it. We're going to have new billing models. We're going to let them pay for it the way that makes sense to them, whether it's based on CPU or bandwidth or fixed cost. That's something that we want to give them much more control over how it applies to their businesses rather than how we as service providers would like to have it. We also want to give them lots of choices. We need to be able to not only provide services that we feel that they need, but we want to give them a much wider variety of choices with the type of services, again, the way we bill for it, how they consume it. So choice is another big part of this beyond control. And then the final one is agility. We really want to make things fast, efficient, on-demand, customer portals, able to turn things up and down when the customer needs it, not weeks and months the way that we currently provide services now. So those are really the three promises that we get from virtualization and what we're hoping to bring to our customer base. So what's driving the demand for these new type of ways of consuming? We talk about the chaos of everything. That's a term that's been thrown around a little bit. And really it comes down to a lot more devices being connected to the network, new bandwidth, new ways of consuming. And if you think about smartphones, back in 2007, when Apple launched the first smartphone, 1.4 million phones sold that year. Fast forward to today, the release of the iPhone 6S, 14 million sold at the time that it launched. That's the type of growth that we're talking about. Connected cars. By the end of 2015, it's expected that 20% of the cars on the road will be connected to the internet in some way or another. Fast forward to 2020, and it's expected to be 250 million cars that are connected to the internet. And then where it really gets interesting is we get to the Internet of Things. You think about every device in your house, every sensor in your car, all connected to the network. 26 billion devices by 2020. That's just outstanding growth that changes the fundamental way that we're going to consume resources. And as enterprise customers, this is the type of environment that your customers are living in. And so it's going to drive changes in your world as well. And this sounds like a scary thing for a lot of enterprises, is how do we adapt to this? But at the same time, there's a lot of opportunity here. So you think about enterprises that can embrace this type of model, it opens up all kinds of opportunity for new ways of providing services to their customers and new revenue streams. But to do this, they're going to need new ways of consuming bandwidth, network, communications, and that's really where we as a service provider need to adapt to bring this kind of thing to our customers. In order to adapt to this, IT managers really need to be able to fundamentally speed up the way that they react to the business. And unfortunately, IT is usually the last to know about something that's happening. And by the time it's happened, they need to react to it so quickly that it's, why isn't it already done? So if we can put the tools into the hands of the IT managers to provide the resources, the networks that they want on demand, then we end up with an environment where they can react to the business needs that they're facing so that they can continue to innovate for their customers. We also have a move to the cloud. There's a lot of new architectures coming out where most of the resources that IT consumes is going to be moving to the cloud. It's expected in the next 2 years that 86% of resources, 86% of enterprises will connect to at least 2 clouds. That's a fundamental change from where we've been in the past, where everything was internal, total control, and you built it in a single data center. So again, that's driving demands on bandwidth and connectivity that we haven't really seen before. Our customers are wanting more on-demand services. You think about their daily lives, they can go out to Amazon and buy a blender and point and click and have it on your doorstep the next day. We're not providing services as service providers that way today, but that's what our customers are beginning to expect. If they can have it at home, why can't they have it from their service providers? And also, your customers are demanding more value from you. To stay relevant in the market, your customers are expecting you to provide them with new services, new ways of providing them what they're looking for, and that's driving more demands as well on how you consume our resources. So effectively, IT challenges are becoming service provider challenges. How do we give you the tools to meet the needs of your customers? So what does that mean for us as service providers? First of all, we have a very high cost of an installed base in our networks. Lots of hardware, lots of infrastructure, lots of processes around that. We've spent a lot of time and money building that, and it's a very good and robust infrastructure, but it's not dynamic enough. It can't do what we need to do to move forward to provide these kind of dynamic services. And we're also being asked to push a lot more bandwidth out there to provide a lot more connectivity than has existed in the past. And a lot of times we're being asked to provide it faster than we're able to because of the hardware infrastructure that we've already got in place. And it's very costly for us to change that. So that's something that we fundamentally have to change to be able to keep up with the market. We also have price compression. We're finding that it's becoming much more commodity for the basic services that we provide. So we're finding that the costs that we're spending to put it in place are going up at the same time that our margins are going down. And that's really compressing us as an industry. And we need to find new ways to provide those services that allow us to do it in a way that's cost effective and, frankly, keep us in business while we can still meet the needs that we're hearing from our customers of lower cost, faster agility, more bandwidth, all of those type of things. So, in effect, your customers are demanding more value from you. You're demanding more value from us at the same time. So it really comes back full circle of we're all facing the same issues. We're just one step further in the food chain than you guys are. So what is CSPs going to do to fix that? So fundamentally, it comes down to 2 basic things. We need to be more responsive to our customers. We need to listen to what they're asking for and find ways to innovate around that to provide that to them. A couple examples at XO that we've done listening to our customers and meeting those needs in the recent past is we heard that interacting with us was very difficult. We had lots of different web portals. Depending on what services they were talking about, they might have to log into one place or another, and there wasn't sharing between them. So we fixed that. We created MyXO, a single portal that everything that the customer has is in one place with a holistic view. We're not completely there yet. We've moved about 80% of our existing products over to that new portal, and anything new that we develop goes on to that same portal as well. But we should have that finished fairly soon. And that's an example of something that our customers demanded from us and we brought around. And the feedback that we had have been very good. People are really liking that new portal. Another example is we built a dedicated support team for mid-market and enterprise customers. We wanted a team that was specifically focused on that segment of the market. They had very different needs than some of our other customers, And we found that we weren't meeting those needs as well as we should. So we created a dedicated team for that and some processes around that. The response has been phenomenal. Our customers have absolutely loved this, and we're down now to 1% churn in that space, which is unheard of just a few years ago. So we're very happy with that. But that's another example where our customers told us what they needed, and we responded. And then we have to innovate. We have to bring about new technologies, new ways of doing business to meet the requirements that we're hearing from our customers. And that's something in the industry, actually, we've done pretty well. We have a long history of innovation, not just at XO, but the CSP market in general has done very well at innovating. We're just at another stage of that. So let's take a look at some of the things that we've done in the past, some of the type of changes that we've made. Bandwidth on demand. Customers were saying, hey, we don't want to pay for a large circuit that we might only use 10% of the time, but we need it there in case we burst to that during our heavy traffic times. That didn't sit well with them. They wanted a different way of consuming resources, and so what we as an industry did was develop bandwidth on demand. That was a place that we innovated as an industry to bring about something that customers needed. A really interesting one is voice over IP. As we made the change to IP, bringing voice and data together, that was a sea change within our industry. There was a lot of gnashing of teeth around that and a lot of work that went into bringing that to bear. But once we were there, the interesting thing was we then had a platform that all kinds of things developed after that. Unified communications, which is a big part of what we're talking about at this show today, was born out of voice over IP. It could never have happened until we got to VoIP. But we didn't know about UC when we were doing VoIP. And that's a really good thing to keep in mind, that as we build these new technologies, it's going to drive things that we can't even envision today. And so as we look forward to some of the things that are coming up, that's something we want to keep in mind. 100 gig is another one. We've moved a large percentage of our backbone core to multiple 100 gig circuits. And we are now actually selling 100 gig directly to customers in some of our larger markets. That's a sea change as well. The ability to provide that kind of bandwidth allows our customers to develop applications and services that were never possible before. So that's another place that, as an industry, we've been innovating to get something that's going to change the way we do business moving forward. So now let's jump to the buzzwords of the day. NFV and SDN. You've heard those a lot. You've probably heard them run together. NFV, SDN. I don't know how many times I've heard those 6 letters run together. Let's break it down just a little bit. NFV is really about taking network functions and running them in software on industry standard servers. Sounds really easy. There's actually a whole lot of complexity behind that, but at a base level, that's really what we're talking about. Taking those functions and running it on a server rather than in dedicated hardware. Now, the IT guys are thinking, took you guys long enough. We've been doing virtualization on servers for decades. So what's different now? Well, the difference is that we finally got to a point where network functions could be run in this environment. We got the stability of the underlying virtualization. We got CPU power that was up to the point where for a lot of functions we actually could run them in software and get the type of performance we needed. So there's a lot of things that have come together in the last couple of years that make NFV possible. The other piece of the puzzle is software-defined networking, SDN. Unfortunately, SDN has become one of those words like cloud. Everything's cloud these days. It doesn't matter what you've got, what product it is. If somehow it's not running right in front of you, it's cloud. SDN is another one of those. It means a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people. Every vendor you talk to is going to have a different story of what SDN means. But at a very basic level, SDN is a way to provide end-to-end connectivity in a very dynamic, very programmable way. It allows us to connect devices very quickly in ways that we didn't have before. It's not something static that you pin up once and it's done. You're able to change it, you're able to control it, you're able to bring it up and down. It's very dynamic, and that really is the promise of SDN. There's a lot of places in the network where it may come into play. Some people are doing it in the core, some at the edge, some end-to-end from customers. But ultimately, it's about connecting devices in a programmable way. So now we get to a marketing slide. I'm not a marketing guy, so we'll buzz past this. But NFV brings network functions to the cloud, and SDN brings the power of the cloud to the network. Sounds really nice, sounds a little fluffy. There's a whole lot of complexity behind this, but ultimately, that's reasonably true. There's a whole lot of hype right now around NFV and SDN, and some of it's hype, some of it's real, but there's a lot of excitement regardless of how you look at it. It's expected that in the next 4 years, we're going to have $30 billion worth of investment in either NFV and SDN. Now, that's not all just service providers. That's vendors, service providers, enterprises. It's all combined, but that's still a lot of money being thrown at this. You can expect that there's going to be a lot of interest and a lot of innovation happening when there's that kind of dollars involved. In the mobile space, it's expected that we can see up to 70% reduction in CapEx and OpEx based on the combination of NFV and SDN. Now, XO Communications is not a mobile player. For us, this is not the kind of savings that we're going to see, but there are portions of the mobile network that really lend themselves well to this technology. And what you're seeing is it's a no-brainer for them to move a lot of those functions back into centralized data centers and save a huge amount of money. So the mobile providers and, to some degree, the residential providers are a little bit out there ahead because for them there's a very clear ROI in the short term. For other industries, like for XO as a wireline provider, it's not as clear-cut on a revenue standpoint or a CapEx and OpEx standpoint. It's much more for us about providing the agility that we had talked about before. So there's really two things that these technologies bring. One is the cost savings, one is the agility, and the mix of which one's important really depends on the industry, the company, where you fit in the marketplace, and so you'll see varying different kinds of balances between those two, but both are important. And then this third is kind of what I've been talking about, the ability to deploy a new network service. Typically for telcos has been on the average of 15 months. It's anywhere from 1 year to 2 years by the time you bring it into the lab, you develop it, you build the processes around it, you figure out how to market it, you deploy it into the field. It's a very long, very tedious process. As we move to a much more agile environment around NFV and SDN, we should be able to bring these numbers down. They're saying 6 months here. I think we'll actually see that drop well below that as we move forward a few years down the road. And this isn't going to just impact service providers. This is going to impact enterprises for sure, as we're able to give you new services that will transform the way you do business. And it absolutely is going to impact the hardware providers and the software providers. We've got a lot of work going on in our labs right now. We're talking to most of our vendors. We're bringing them into the lab. There's lots of cooperation. And none of this stuff is really solidified yet. So it's not a one-way street the way it used to be. If a vendor comes in and says, here's what we've got, do you want to buy it? It's, here's what we got, here's what we're thinking, what do you need? So the same way that we're trying to react to our customers, they're trying to react to our needs. And in some cases, we haven't figured out even what those needs are either. So we're working together as an industry, vendors, software and hardware, as well as the CSPs, to build consensus around where this needs to go. What we need is technology, what we need is services. So it's really touching a lot of the ecosystem across the board. So let's take a quick look at CSPs of yesterday. We used to just provide voice services. In a lot of cases, it was very monopolistic. We had maybe no competitors, maybe 1 or 2 competitors. We were able to provide a single service. We did it very well, but there wasn't a whole lot of pressure to be competitive. And it could often take us months to deliver a service, and from our standpoint, that was okay because nobody else could do any better. Well, that's not going to cut it anymore, obviously. So let's move forward to where we are today. One of the things that we've seen is that there's a lot more competition, first of all. I talked about our costs going up and our margins going down. Those are pressures that we're under right now. Another interesting thing that happened was that voice and data merged. You used to see when you went into a customer and also internally that the voice groups and the data groups were completely separate. There was no interaction between the two. They had nothing in common. As voice moved and became data, basically, when VoIP happened, you saw the merging of those two groups. And that's something that happened within our industry as well as with our customers, is the merging of voice and data. So that's a trend that I think we're going to see moving forward as well, now that we're going to have not only voice and data, but we've got networks being run by software. That means that IT and network has to come together as well, the same way that voice and data did a few years back. Another thing that we're finding in the market, in our personal environment today as CSPs, is that we're very limited by the hardware that we have in place. As I said before, we've built these vast infrastructures that are very stable, very good, based on really reliable technology, but it's also technology that's not lending itself to the agile nature that we need to have. So we're going to have to address that issue before we can move forward into this new dynamic environment that we want to get to. So let's talk a little bit now about the future of CSPs. So where will we be in 5 to 10 years? I think we're going to see a lot more ability for our customers to manage their own services. Self-service portals, I think, are going to be a huge step for us. And that doesn't mean that we're just going to abdicate our responsibility of doing any work. We're going to allow our customers to have control over it, but we will still be there for them to provide the support, to give suggestions, to help them through that process. But ultimately, we want them to have the control of when they need something, they can turn it up under their control, when they want it, how they want it. I think that's a big change that's going to be happening. And part of what comes with that is on-demand services. So things like we're already doing with bandwidth on demand, I think we're going to see security on demand, load balancing on demand, network on demand. There's a whole lot of other pieces that I think we're going to see in the on-demand type model. And in addition to the controls for turning things up and down and ordering new services, I think we're also going to see more control in the customer's hands on visibility into their network, statistics, monitoring, all those type of things, so they can actually see that we're providing what we say that we're providing to them. I think that we're going to see a lot more transparency there. I think part of that also is we're going to have a lot more automation in the network. That's part of what goes with this new agile environment. We're going to have a lot more flow through provisioning. Point and click goes all the way through to providing the services. And I think that's going to make a much more streamlined customer experience that, frankly, I think is long overdue. But that's a big change that I see coming for us as well. And then also I think we're going to have global partnerships to provide end-to-end services. Not every service provider is going to cover every market and provide every service. And I think as we move forward, we're going to see some APIs between service providers and vendors and software providers that allow us to stitch together an end-to-end service for a customer in a way that's not really possible now. And part of that's going to be then providing the visibility and the controls over that end-to-end. If you're no longer talking about a single provider, but you've got all these different moving pieces, you need some way to control that, to understand what's going on and to not only troubleshoot, but to order and change and manage that kind of infrastructure. And that's further out, but I think that's going to be critical to making some of this stuff truly where we need to get to. There's also, as things move to the cloud, I think there's going to be a much more global infrastructure of cloud providers and network providers coming together to provide a seamless environment, the same way we would do for any other kind of service, being able to move things between clouds and having the infrastructure in place to make that all work seamlessly, I think is going to be a key piece of the technology as well. So back to where I started, it really comes down to three things: control, choice, and agility. Control, self-service portals, billing models that let you bill the way that it applies to your businesses, the ability to try things try for free until you find the right one that works for you and putting that in place. It just puts a lot more control into the hands of the customer to do what's right for their business as opposed to what we want to sell them on any given day. And along with that comes the choice, the ability to choose from a variety of different services that may be similar, but each one in its own way, or to tailor services the way you need them to meet the specific demands of any given business. And then the agility to have those on demand as you need them, where you need them, when you need them. I think that's going to be the most promising piece of this whole thing. So that's all I had for now. Any questions? Yes, sir.
How are you doing on rolling out fiber to businesses?
So the question was, how are we doing rolling out fiber to the businesses? You talking EXO specifically, or the EXO? So yes, we have a very large initiative right now for doing what we're calling on-net buildings. So we are targeting buildings in all of our major metro areas to get fiber directly to those buildings. And We've had some pretty good penetration in the last few months. We stalled for a little while we were working through a lot of the issues with landlords and leases and things like that, but we've made a lot of good progress recently, and that's going to be a key part of some of this dynamic agility that we're talking about. Once we're already in a building, we're able to turn up a customer much faster. We can directly provision a circuit directly to them in their own building in minutes rather than days or weeks. So that's going to actually be a big part of the infrastructure that allows us to do this.
And let's say I wanted a 1 gigabyte target connection.
So I am not in sales and marketing, so I have no idea. So the question was, how much do we charge for a 1 gig circuit? And to be honest, I have no idea. But we do have people right behind you. There's a man with a card who'd be happy to tell you.
Hey, Matt, question for you was,
Yeah.
All right, so can you give us Matt, can you give us some specific examples of some of the applications you see XO being able to offer as a result of the change in architecture?
Yeah, good question. So what is XO doing in the short term in this area? So the first two places that we're really looking, one is virtualizing SBC, Session Border Controller, for those who may not be familiar. It's a box that we would put between a customer's IP PBX and our back-end voice systems. And it allows us to translate. Every PBX does things its own way. Each one has its own quirks. And we need to be able to translate those into something standard that will meet our back-end needs. And so SBC is the box that allows us to do that. And historically, we've literally bought a box and sent it out to the customer site or driven it out to the customer site and hooked it up. Took a long time to provision. It was fairly expensive. That's a functionality that we can very easily run in software. So that's one of the first ones that we're going to be virtualizing. And then the other is firewall services. We currently have a product called Hosted Security, which allows us to provide our IPVPN customers access to the internet through a firewall that we manage for them through one of our partners, BAE. And we do a managed security, a hosted security for them in that environment. We want to be able to expand the footprint of that product and have per customer firewalls anywhere that we need to in our network. That is based on the same idea. It'll be handled very much the same way, but once we bring them into software, we're able to do that in a way that's much more dynamic and much faster for the customer. So those are the two areas that we're initially going, but it's really about building the platform for NFV. Once it's in place, then there are lots of different services that we can add on top of that. We as a company have a very strong role in interactive voice response systems, and that's a platform that currently is running on dedicated hardware. Absolutely no reason that can't run in an NFV environment. So that's another area that we're looking.
Quick question. Speaking of security, what are you doing to support ZRTPs in Zulu, real-time protocol?
So I'll be honest, I've never heard of ZRTPs.
So those of us in finance who underwrite industry, it's a really big issue, security. And what we're looking for is carriers that provide that transparently with open network.
I will take that back to some of the folks working on more of the RTP side and ask them about that, but I'm sorry, I don't know.
Sure.
Quick question, Matt.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for our enterprise customers' infrastructure? Are they going to be required to forklift upgrade all of their existing infrastructure today, add in new infrastructure, or is it just maybe an addition of software? What does this mean for our enterprise customers?
Oh, great question. Initially, it shouldn't mean any change for our customers. It's about services that we're providing to them that they don't already have, such as firewall. If they don't already have a firewall and they want to buy that from us, it just means that we can do it faster and cheaper for them. It doesn't really mean any difference in how they would deploy that. Now, if they already have their own firewall and want to go to the same technology, then that's a different story. That means trying to take that into their infrastructure and finding the right place to run it in a virtual environment. Certainly can be done, but then it becomes much more involved. So it's really about how much a customer wants to do it themselves internally versus use the services that we provide to them. And so it comes down to, do you do it in-house or do you outsource it or do you have it hosted for you? So that's a question that IT departments are going to continue to ask themselves. And the answer is going to change over time, but I think it also depends on what area you're talking about. For some customers, it might be, yes, we want to outsource a bunch of stuff to Amazon to put our servers out there, and for others, it's like, no, we need this internal. I think that same discussion is going to happen around network functions as well.
Two different cloud platforms. Are you talking about two different cloud provider platforms, or if an enterprise customer has their own cloud platforms, it allows them to share certain workloads between their own cloud platforms?
All of the above, actually. If done correctly, we should be able to provide a service to our customers that allow them to move resources from their data centers to another data center, to a cloud data center, to somebody else's cloud data center. We're not there yet. That's the nirvana we're headed towards, but we're making steps in that direction already by providing IPVPN connectivity to Amazon and to Azure, and doing that in a way that allows our customers to keep all of their network traffic in a private environment rather than on the internet. So that's sort of the first step down that path, but the ultimate goal is to make that a seamless cloud that doesn't really matter where it is located.
Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Do you see a time where the federal government will deregulate the last mile? So you were mentioning expanding into multi-tenanted locations. If another operator is already in there, do you think there's going to be any intervention for EXO being allowed to use whatever infrastructure is already in place? Because I see as this evolves, operators are going to be providing their blend of services, and that's not really going to be always subject to what last mile is in place. It's more about their preference of products and services and flexibility that they want to push.
Great question. I'm going to have to beg off on this one because it's not in my area of expertise. I know that we've got a lot of folks looking at that, talking to regulators, trying to influence policy. It's certainly going to be an issue for us, but I personally don't have any experience to really bring any value to that question.
Specifically around, thank you. It's always been around usage-based. So now we're moving into WebRTC, we're moving into SIP. So it's more about session-based pricing. So what kind of things you guys are looking into in the future as a pricing model?
So I'm not sure if everybody heard the beginning of that, but what are we as a company doing around various pricing models, especially around things like WebRTC, where rather than usage-based, it's more session-based? That's still an area that needs a lot of work. It's a great question because that's something that we're struggling with internally. And what I personally would like to see is the ability to charge in whatever way makes the most sense to the customer. So rather than having a single way and saying, this is how we're going to bill for it, I think we should be able to provide lots of different ways of billing for it in whatever way makes the most sense for those who are consuming it. We're nowhere close to that right now, but I think that's ultimately where it needs to go. All right. Well, we're just about out of time anyway. Thank you all.